All right, I'm going to go through the forage aspects of it on the on-farm demonstrations and also on the Batesville Experiment Station demonstration, kind of give you an idea where we're going with that. But I'll start out with a survey and this was conducted by Gary Lacefield a couple of years ago, and he reported on it here at this meeting. But I thought it was very interesting and it fit the program quite well. When you look around the country about who's feeding hay and how long they're feeding hay. And this is just a very truncated version of his survey, but we're sitting here in Arkansas. Typical hay feeding season is about 135 to 140 days. Starts mid-November usually and ends up about late March, maybe the 1st of April. So kind of look around the country. You know, there's Wisconsin, 140 days. Looked at Missouri, 140 days. Looked at, back up, Mississippi, 140 days. And the last I checked, the winters are a little bit longer in Wisconsin than they are down here in the south. And, you know, we've got a good forage-based, you know, good warm and cool season component in the southern states. There's really no reason we should be feeding hay that long if they're feeding hay 140 days in Wisconsin. So I think there's a lot of ground that we can make up there and improve our efficiency of management. So we kind of look at this whole 300-day grazing program, and I underline grazing up here because we're not talking about 300 days of forage feeding. We're talking about 300 days of grazing, and then try to use our stored forages after that. So I always ask this question when I talk to producers: do you plan for a hay crop? And how many of you have producers that always plan for a hay crop? You know, most of you'd probably say, yeah, we do. And then I asked them, how do you know that you can plan for that hay crop? And they'll, you know, throw out various reasons, and we kind of get some discussion going. But then when they talk about it, you know, if I'm baling Bermuda grass like here, this slide shows here, I know that Bermuda grass grows at a certain time of the year, and I know if I give it a certain type of management, I'm going to get a hay crop 99 times out of 100. It may be a better hay crop one year than another, but I'm always going to get a hay crop. Same way with fescue. We can always get a hay crop if we plan and manage for it. So then I ask them the question, or tell them you can also plan for a pasture crop. If you know when your forages should grow, you can plan and manage for that. So these plans do require action though, and I tell them you can't just have it as an idea in your head. You have to really put it in place, and it may be something different than you've ever done before on the farm. If you've baled hay all summer to feed hay all winter, you have to change your thinking a little bit. You can't be like this producer here that thought he was going to clean the brush out of that fence row one day, or this producer that, can't get used to this, this producer that thought he was going to wean his calves and he didn't get around to it, and then his calves had calves. So that was a problem. So you got to put it into place and get some action going. So I'll start off with this quote here, and I found this, thought it was quite interesting, is the cheapest of all feed is pasture because it furnishes a balanced ration at low cost and the cow does her own harvesting. In comparatively few cases is the fullest possible use made of pasture. That could have been written in any extension newsletter within the last 12 months. All right? I found that in the 1922 USDA Yearbook of Agriculture. So we talk about history repeating itself, and we're rediscovering a lot of things right now and trying to put it into perspective and get producers using management again. So we look at the steps for a 300-day grazing season, and we put together a set of 5 steps, and these work on any farm to help somebody focus and emphasize what they need to do on their own particular operation. And we start out with an inventory of their forage base. What forages do you have available to graze, and when are they growing? And that's what we start with. On all our projects, we try to work with them where they're at. We don't go in and say you have to go plant this and manage this and all these new things. Try to start with them with the forages that they have available, and then we work from there. And then once we have that inventory of what's growing and what they have and when it's growing, we try to determine what management practices we can add to what those forages they already have to extend the grazing season with those forages. And oftentimes they may have a simple forage base of fescue and Bermuda grass, and you can have a 300-day grazing season with that. And we've done it. But just have to understand what you have, what practices you can add to that to add to it, and go from there. And then the third step, if there are any gaps in that seasonal forage production, based on that inventory and based on the second step where we add those extra practices, then we can add a complementary forage to help fill that gap in. And that may change year to year depending on weather conditions. And I'll talk to you about what we had to do this year because of the drought, where we were able to do that. And then a fourth point is to plan your grazing practices ahead for the entire year. And a lot of producers will look at me and say, well, you can't do that. You don't know what the year is going to be like. And I say, yeah, you can. Because if you think about it, what's a typical spring like in Arkansas for our conditions? It's cool and wet. And they nod in agreement. What's a typical summer like? It's hot and dry. And they nod in agreement. And the fall can be variable, but it usually starts out hot and dry and then turns cooler and gets wetter. And we can have a plan for each one of those. That's our base plan A. And if we have that in place and we know every year that's what we're going to go to, and then if things start to go off the tracks like they have in the last couple of drought years, then you have that plan B, and I'll talk about that later. But you always have to have that plan so you know when you're going to do it, and that gets you a schedule. Just like that planning for that hay crop. Typically you fertilize this day or this month to have that hay crop to cut, this month. It's the same situation. And then we want to keep some records so we can monitor and adjust based on, seasonal conditions, year-to-year variations, so we can adjust our forages and livestock as needed. But these 5 points have been very consistent. So we look at this 300-day grazing season, and I'll just put the points up there again that Dr. Troxel pointed out. The improved grazing management, using legumes, reducing hay waste during storage and during feeding, using stockpiled Bermuda grass or Bahia grass, stockpiled fescue, winter annuals, summer annuals, and these whole farms and the research station gave us a chance to verify a lot of these recommendations we were making. And also on the livestock forestry research station, we could do some tweaks and try some different things that we wouldn't necessarily push a producer to do, so we could experiment just a little bit within that program. So far we've had 146 on-farm demonstrations throughout the state in 50 counties. And so Kenny's done a tremendous job keeping this going. And we've measured $283,000 in direct savings to the producers enrolled in those projects. And considering that the average beef herd is about 35 to 38 cows in Arkansas, and the typical farm size is 200 acres or less, that's pretty significant savings. So we'll kind of get into the individual components here, the improved grazing management. We're talking about rotational grazing, strip grazing, and we've documented that strip grazing doubles the number of grazing days that we get out of stockpiled forage versus continuous turning the cattle out on the entire pasture. And it also saves us an extra $10 per animal unit versus just turning the cattle out on that pasture. And so that can pay for a simple electric fence strip grazing kit fairly quickly. And we had producers one year that were considering subdividing their farm, dividing the pastures up where they had large fields, where they were planning to use traditional barbed wire construction. And we worked with them, and Kenny showed them how to build electric fence that actually works. And he showed that material cost saved them almost $15,000 compared to that traditional barbed wire fence. So that was really significant there. Now what we're talking about with subdividing these farms or these fields is try to keep it as simple and flexible as possible. And we really try to get people to shy away from building a lot of small permanent paddocks. Because when you get the last post in the ground, when you have a lot of small permanent paddocks, it's obsolete that day. Because if the weather changes, your herd numbers change, anything changes, it doesn't fit anymore. So we try to keep it as flexible as possible. In this case, this farm that we worked this producer on, this is a 40-acre field of fescue, and you can see the pond wasn't ideally located to really divide it well to get even grazing. And he was able to get rural water to the farm. And so we built one paddock right up here with single high tensile wire, and that gave him a receiving pen basically, so he could bring cattle up if he needed to, bring work cattle there by the working facility. And then we put one more high tensile wire down the top of the ridge. That's the only permanent fence we put up. And you can see where the gates are. And with the water system that he was able to put in, he put some tire tanks in so it distributed the water better across that farm. And then with temporary wire, he could subdivide that any way he wanted to subdivide it. He could bale this half for hay, take these wires out and graze this half, or vice versa. He could fertilize the whole field, he could spray it, he could do any major operation he needed to, and in 30 minutes he could put the temporary wires right back out. And it keeps it very, very flexible. He can have different herds going at one time, very minimal fencing cost, but it gives him the flexibility to do just about anything he wants. And other producers have done different variations on this. With legumes, we documented a couple of farms that they were able to save $4,600 on nitrogen fertilizer cost by getting the forage production using legumes instead of having to pay the fertilizer to get it from the grass. With our improved hay storage and feeding, we've documented about 10% losses, just under 10% losses for hay stored in the barn, but 25% loss for hay stored outside uncovered. So 2.5 times more loss where we're not managing it. And with the hay feeding, we found about 13% waste for hay fed in a hay ring, 24% waste where it was unrolled and more than what they'd clean up just in a very short time. And then had one producer that processed his hay through a grinder and fed it through in tubs and had less than 1% waste. More cost, but it fit his operation. He had the equipment, didn't have a lot of hay. So different methods. This is a producer, and actually this is on Kenny's farm, and he's always thinking about a better way to do something. And this summer when we had the drought, and you can see how the pastures look, there just wasn't much there. He was having to feed hay for a short period of time to keep the cattle up off the other pastures to protect them. And he'd unroll the bale of hay, and you could see the cattle are standing all over it. And that's what we get, a lot of waste from trampling and laying on it and soiling, things like that. So he had electric fence, and you can see right there, he hooked a polywire reel on that and strung it right over the length of that bale, and see how they lined up. It's just like they were at a feed trough. So it worked out really well. And then, but he went in and after the short feeding time, raked up the waste and measured it and weighed it. And we found that, and this was a case where they were limit fed anyway, but he had 6% less waste, and at $65 a bale, feeding it this way, that's $3.90 a bale. That's about almost $120 a month if he fed a bale a day. If it's 2 bales a day, that's about almost $250 a month. Just by that one little simple practice. And so things like this can add up pretty quick, and it's really simple to do. Talk about our stockpiling forages, and we stockpile Bermuda grass and Bahia grass, and we also have had stockpile Dallas grass projects. And basically the recipe for that, we want to soil test the field. We want to clean all that old growth off by early August. Get about 50 to 60 pounds of nitrogen on sometime by early August, mid-August if we're in southern Arkansas. Defer the grazing till mid-October because that's usually when the nights get cool enough that Bermuda grass is done growing for the year, even though it might still be green if we haven't had a frost. We try to strip graze that to extend the grazing period out, and we can graze it very effectively from October all the way to December, even after killing frost. With stockpiled fescue, it's the same recipe, just a different schedule. We start clean off that old growth by late August. By the first part of September, we want to get some nitrogen on that, let that growth accumulate till December, and strip graze it out, and we can graze it all the way till March if we have enough available. And this is a field of stockpiled Bermuda grass, and you can see how where the fence had been previously that morning, the cattle had just been turned in on this new strip, and you can see how effectively they graze it. Well, there's a reason for that, and it is very good quality material if it's set up this way. And these two graphs showed quality of stockpiled fescue and stockpiled Bermuda grass. And up here, the dotted lines represent the nutrient requirements for either a dry cow or a lactating beef cow. And all the TDN numbers, nearly all of them, stay above that line, even for a lactating cow, all the way till December for the stockpiled fescue, and then they start to kind of tail off. Crude protein stays up above that all the way until March. With the stockpiled Bermuda grass, you can see we have a tremendous amount of samples staying above that line, even for a lactating cow. All of them stay above the line for a dry cow all the way until December, and then they start to tail off somewhat. So the quality stays very good. And if any of you have ever noticed or looked at the hay contest at this meeting, the Northwest Arkansas Mafia that Chris Agee calls them, they consistently win that contest and for the Bermuda grass class. And they've won the first, second, and third places in that for 12 consecutive years. The highest quality cutting of the year is that last cutting of the year, which would correspond to what we're doing with this stockpiled Bermuda grass. where they're basically getting it set up in August for that last cutting of hay that they take in September or October. We're setting this up in August for that grazing in October, November, December. Same situation, but we're grazing it instead of harvesting. Stockpiled forages kind of give you some numbers. In fact, this field right here was summer before last in northern Arkansas, and that picture was taken in August. It was about 102 degrees that day, and that field crunched when you walked across it. Same field in December, where you set it up, had a nice stockpile, run those stocker calves on it. But we look at some numbers here in 2011, some stockpile Bermuda grass projects, and you can see some acreages there. Not large fields, but people stockpile what they have available. It could be 5 acres, it could be 100 acres. But the savings per animal unit runs from $39 here up to $99 per animal unit there. Total savings for the farm from $2,600 to over $4,000 for the farm. And you can see we can get from 75 up to almost 200 animal unit grazing days per acre. So very, very good yields if we set it up properly. With stockpiled fescue, 3 counties that year we had enrolled. See the acreages were very similar. Savings per animal unit were similar from $22 to about $63 there. And the savings per farm from $1,100 to about $4,500 and almost 100 animal unit grazing days. And it varies around year to year, but depending on conditions, but these are really consistent numbers. With our winter annuals, had a couple of farms enrolled that we measured in 2010, and you can see right around 30 acres, savings per animal unit was about $60, and $1,700 to about $2,400 for the farm for just that winter grazing period. This doesn't count the spring grazing that came afterward. And the last year, 2011, the drought in southwest Arkansas was as severe as it was in Texas and Oklahoma. And we conducted a winter annual, or a drought meeting down there, and Dr. Paul Beck talked about his winter annual research. We talked about the 300-day grazing program, things like that. And a lot of those producers went home. They got winter annual seed. They went out, even on those drought-stressed pastures. They planted it. They did get some rain finally. It did come up. Turned out to be a fairly mild winter. And they reported tremendous savings versus the amount of hay that they would have had to feed or sell their herd. That was the choice they had. Either buy that hay at $75 or $80 a bale that wasn't very good quality, or sell out. But by planting the winter annuals, they were able to maintain their operations and still harvested hay the next spring. So very, very valuable. With the Forage Brassicas, this has been very interesting, and we have a couple posters if you have time to look at those later. But these Forage Brassicas are just amazing at how much dry matter they can make in such a short period of time if we get them planted right. And you can visit with Kenny and Steve, and they'll tell you all the details. But dry matter range we've seen from 1,500 to 3,000 pounds in less than 60 days after planting. Crude protein, you can see the range there, very, very high quality TDN. Works for cattle, works for small ruminants. Steve tells me horses will not eat them, so we haven't even tried that. But when we look at the numbers on this, this was first year, or last year. Some of these were small animal units and small acreages were for small ruminant operations. This was a cow-calf here. But you look at the savings here. Here's an $11 per animal unit, $200. Here's $38 for a cow-calf, which falls in line with a lot of the other projects. Here's one at $450 per animal unit versus what he had been feeding before with his goat operation. And you can look at the savings and the animal unit grazing days. It's just tremendous if we get them planted right, how much growth we can get and manage them for regrowth that we can keep grazing on and on. So they're very, very good forages, and they fit that niche in the fall when we really don't get production from anything else. We have 3 whole farms that Dr. Troxell mentioned, one in Van Buren County, one in Lawrence County, one in Randolph County, and then the Batesville Research Station is right here. Give you some background on them. Lawrence County was a cow-calf operation, and he backgrounds his calves after he weans. Has 90 acres of forage, about 1.5 acres per animal unit stocking rate, about half fescue clover and about half Bermuda grass on his farm. He uses rotational grazing with temporary electric wire, and you can see he has the permanent barbed wire fences and just uses reels to hook onto high tensile wire that's attached to the barbed wire fence with a standoff insulator. And then so he can strip graze there. He oversees red and white clover. So far, he's achieved grazing seasons of 335, 350, 275 in a drought year. And last year, he had 2 different herds that made over 300 days grazing. So very, very good results for him. Van Buren County, again, it's a cow-calf operation, and they background their calves after weaning. 120 acres of forage, 1.5 acres per annum unit stocking rate, about 3/4 fescue clover and about 1/4 Bermuda grass and some crabgrass. They use rotational grazing. They strip graze stockpile fescue in the fall and winter. They have overseeded a little crabgrass, overseeded a lot of white clover, and they've made 312, 280, and 247 days grazing. And these last 2 years, the drought in that particular part of the state hit them more severely than just about anywhere else. In Randolph County, the producer there has cow-calves operation and buys a lot of stockers, 600 acres of forage, about 2 acres per animal unit, about half fescue clover, about 1/4 Bermuda grass and Lespedeza, and 20% mixed. He uses daily rotational grazing with temporary electric wire, oversees white clover, and he's made 300 days grazing the first 2 years. The next year, last year, it was 260, and it wasn't because he ran out of grass. It's because the ponds went dry, and so he had to bring the cattle up where he could get water to them. So still very, very effective, and that producer's Eddie Prince, and he'll be talking to you later today, and you'll hear more details about his farm. On the Livestock and Forestry Research Station at Batesville, it's a fall calving herd. We have 38 cows. Calving season starts about the 1st of September. We wean the calves in May, and we try to graze them until July to put some extra weight on them and some extra value. 130 acres of forage, and that includes fescue, legumes, Bermuda grass, so it's about 70-30 mix of cool season to warm season. Stocking rate's about 2.5 acres per animal unit when you consider the extra animal units after the calves are weaned for that period. And we have electric fence and water for all the pastures. On all these projects, the whole farms that producers have, and on the Batesville Experiment Station as well, the forage base is fescue and clover in the spring, Bermuda grass for the summer, fescue and clover for the fall, and then stockpile forages for the winter. That is a very short, simple list. And they've been making 300 days grazing. So it doesn't take anything fancy. It's just using what you have, trying to extend it out using good practices. So the main principle, the whole 300-day grazing program on the forage side, is know when your forages should grow and plan ahead to make that happen. And we're always planning at least one season ahead to make sure we know what date we're going to do which practice, and so that we can have our spring forages set up, and before summer gets there, we have a plan for the summer forages, and before fall comes, we have a plan for the fall forages and for winter. It's just a schedule, and it's very effective. And we always get this question here: what happens when it doesn't rain? And we've had a chance to find out. But good forage practices always work. I tell you, even when it's not raining, they always work. They just work better when it does rain. And I've heard a lot of people say this over the last couple of years: well, it didn't rain, nothing worked, I just opened the gates. That's the worst thing you can do. You need to really keep your plan in place, because recovery will come. And if you're not set up to take advantage of that recovery, you won't get it. So what we talk about is the good plans will make you look lucky. If you're set up to take advantage of that recovery when it does come, even though it may be small, your neighbors will all complain that you got that rain that they didn't get right across the fence. But your forages were set up to use it. And also, we always want to have a plan A and a plan B, like I've talked about. You have that plan A as your main schedule, and then that plan B is when things start going off the tracks. Our plan A at the Batesville station is this. We use fescue and clover in the spring. We always plan for that. We use Bermuda grass for summer to carry us into early fall. We have some novel endophyte fescue and clover that we always try to manage for when those calves are weaned in the spring, to graze them, to get some extra weight. And we try to make sure it's in good shape again in the fall for those cows just before breeding season. And then we use it other times as well. We have stockpiled fescue for the winter, and then that carries us right back to spring. Pretty simple operation, but we use several practices to get it there. We soil test all our pastures. We don't fertilize all of them, but we soil test all of them. So we know how much gas we have in the tank, so to speak. We fertilize by seasonal need, so we have only fertilized fescue in the spring one time, and that was one pasture. We have enough clover to take care of us in the spring, but we use nitrogen in the fall for the stockpile. We fertilize some Bermuda grass, but we never fertilize all of it at one time, 10 acres at a time, as needed. And then we manage the other pastures around. We use rotational grazing. We fence line wean the calves. We use a leader follower system, so the calves, after they're weaned, they get the paddock for a day or so. We move them on, bring the cows in behind to clean up, so we get the most gain on the calves, maintain the cows. We use strip grazing in the winter on the stockpile. We have had grazing seasons over 300 days for 4 years in a row. And Dr. Troxel mentioned that we wanted to see if we could do it. So far, we've done it. This year, I'll tell you what we are having to work on. This is where we have our Plan B has come in place. In 2011, we thought we had drought. This year, we found out what drought really was in Arkansas. So we worked on our drought management program. This picture was taken in our Bermuda grass pasture on June the 8th. And you see the dust that the calves are kicking up just walking across the field? We'd already fertilized that pasture. You see how much growth we got? Didn't rain. So our plan was that day, if we subdivided every pasture that we had into a 2-day allotment, how much grazing could we potentially have? We thought if we did that, we could get about 3 weeks of grazing. And then hopefully it would rain by 3 weeks. You're always hoping at least that much. Didn't rain. We'd fertilized a portion of the Bermuda grass, thinking, there was a chance of rain in the forecast, at least on that day. That if we fertilize one more paddock, we get shower rain on it, we'll get some growth. Didn't rain. We thought we'd put our weaned calves on the best forage. And we did. Didn't rain. We thought we'd sell the calves early if it didn't rain. And it didn't, so we did. We sold them at the end of June instead of carrying them into July. So if it still didn't rain, our plan was to pull the cows off the pasture, and we had one weedy field that never really was very productive. We were going to feed hay, and that's what we did. Rather than beating up all the pastures and letting the cows graze down to the roots, we pulled them off to protect what we had left, even though it wasn't really grazable, and we fed hay for 49 days, starting in mid-July to basically the end of August. And that was our plan to get us to that point, and then everything else from then on was to plan to take advantage of any recovery when it finally came. And so we had some options to think about for this recovery. We were feeding hay at that period of time there at late August. We knew we had some Johnson grass that was coming up in some of our fescue fields, but it was all wilted. We couldn't use it because of prussic acid potential. We knew there was an option to use it at some point. We knew that Bermuda grass had been fertilized. If we ever got rain, it would have to grow sometime. We had an option of some little bit of alfalfa, 4 acres of that. We had an option of some winter annuals, and we had a possibility of maybe some stockpiling happening if the recovery would start soon enough. So this is the plan that we made. We were on hay, and there in July and August, we moved the cattle up to one small paddock of Bermuda grass just to move them out of that weedy field because we wanted to renovate that. Hurricane Isaac came through right at the last of August, first day of September. And we got significant rain, but in addition, we got a temperature drop. The Johnson grass that we had freshened up, became grazable again. We put the cattle on that. That carried us into October. The Bermuda grass that we had fertilized, it started to grow. Bermuda grass and some other weedy grasses along with it, but it was forage. We were able to go on that in October. We were able to graze that to the middle of November. We had the small field of alfalfa. We came back and only got a few days of grazing out of it. It had really nice fall growth on it, actually, but we had an extra herd grazing on it, and that was the deer. And they took half of it off before the cows finally got back to it. So we didn't get much out of that. We'd planted wheat and turnips and also some forage rape on this field here that we had been feeding hay on. And by the time we grazed through this, that was ready to graze in November. So we were able to go through that. After we finished that, we went back to, we had 2 small fields of Johnson grass and fescue that we had basically stockpiled. Went back to that and started grazing that. We had 10 inches of snow. We got 10-inch Christmas night. We fed hay for about 5 days there. Right now we're finishing up stockpiled fescue, and that'll carry us till about 2 more weeks probably into this month. And then we're going to feed hay, maybe some limit grazing. And we had one other field of Kentucky 31 fescue that we lost about 75% of that from the drought. We, instead of planting Kentucky 31 back, because it's always given us problems with some fescue foot in the winter, we thought we're not doing that again. We've got an unplanned opportunity here. We didn't ask for it, but we've got it. We sprayed it, killed it, planted wheat, and then we're going to renovate that and plant novel fescue back next fall. So that wheat will be there sometime in February and March to graze, along with this other wheat that we planted, and so we have spring grazing taken care of. So the cost of planting all these winter annuals has been about the same value as 30 bales of hay at the cost that we were having to pay. And we're going to get a lot more grazing than 30 days of feed out of that. So kind of the take-home message is plan ahead, because you never know what's going to happen in 30 days. This is the field in August where we're feeding hay. This is the Johnson grass in August where we couldn't use it. This is the Johnson grass in September where we could use it. Just got some rain and cooler temperatures. This is the Bermuda grass in August. It's only about 2.5 inches tall. Really no grazing there. This is the same field in late September after we got that rain. Not all Bermuda grass, but there's a lot of forage there, and that carried us for 45 days. This is the field we had been feeding hay in August. This is the same field in late October where we had the forage brassicas and small grains. So 30 days can make a world of difference if you have a plan in place. If you don't have a plan in place, that it'll stay like that. So finish up with this little quote right here I found. Is the farmer who has plenty of grass is the one who will allow it to get a start in the spring, early summer. The stock work on the reserves through the hot weather. And then in fall, with cooler weather and rains, pasture again grows vigorously. If not overstocked, they get another reserve that makes them pasture all winter. Some farmers keep their stock on pasture all year except when the snow is on the ground, and this is practiced throughout the states of the Central South. That was in the Southern Agriculturalist publication in 1918. So it's 5 steps. They do work. Put a plan in place. All right. Now, Dr. Gadberry will talk about the cattle management side.